The summer after my grandfather passed away, my grandmother used the life insurance money to rent an RV and drive the two of us down to Florida. I was devastated by the loss, obviously, and I think she sensed that this was something that we both needed an escape. We had planned to spend 2 weeks in this quaint little town just north of Miami called Densville. What was supposed to be a small place for tourists to camp out on the beach and have fun turned out to be an abandoned ghost town. There was hardly a soul there. We managed to find one person running a decrepit convenience store as we drove through town. According to him, vengeful ghosts were stalking the swamplands, driving away any living soul who dared to enter. We had already made our reservations for the campsite, so we just shrugged, paid for our Slim Jims, and left. But once we reached the campsite, I began to have my reservations. Ghosts were rumored to be reclaiming the swamps, and it seemed as if the swamps had begun to reclaim the land itself. The person who checked us in informed my grandmother that we were the first people she's seen in months. As destitute as the campground was, I believe it. Pools of dark mire stood where trailers used to park. Mosquitoes buzzed and hissed a symphony of glee as the newly arrived feast. Crocodiles ambled the campground freely and defiantly. They were as commonplace as squirrels, although they were much slower at climbing trees. That night, from inside our RV, we heard an ethereal wailing and moaning coming from deep within the swamp. I don't remember when I drifted off to sleep, but I do remember waking up to the sound going on right outside the door. Suddenly, there was banging against the RV. It began to violently shake. My grandmother, not to be scared into submission, grabbed the closest thing to her bed, a butterfly net, and flung the door open. Before us stood the specter, a pale white sheet with black pits for eyes. Before it even had a chance to react to us, my grandmother flung the net over its head and wrestled it to the ground. Once we had it subdued and better illuminated, we saw it for what it really was. We pulled off the so-called ghost's mask to reveal that it was just a man underneath the entire time. As it turned out, he had managed to find gold out there in the swamp. Crazy, right? His plan was to mine as much as possible while scaring away prying eyes. To make a long story short, we turned him over to the sheriff and received a pretty sizable reward. Big enough for my grandmother to outright buy the RV and take the two of us on a countrywide summer road trip. Hi. The story you heard is something of a tall tale. It's a story that I definitely tried to pass off as true, to my good friend Aaron, as he loyally kept me company waiting in line in the MVA. This is, of course, a much more polished version, as what Aaron heard was all being made up on the fly. It's also the beginning to what became an expansive, hour-long yarn, which detailed my grandmother and I's travels from Pittsburgh to Nebraska, Mount Rushmore to the Wizard of Oz Museum. But why? To pass the time in a crowded line? To try to prank a friend who was doing me a favor? Well, I think there are other reasons why we tell stories. I couldn't drive. I just lost my license. There comes a point where you just want to embrace the madness. To take everything that you've ever swallowed up and spew it back out into the world. Pain, anger, frustration, self-loathing, contempt. Like most stories, this one began with an innocent kernel of truth. Someone I love had died. And how do you ever reconcile with something like that? You make something out of it. A grand adventure. You use stories, whether real or fake or exaggerated, to begin healing. You fabricate your own reality because, at least there, you have complete control. And the ending is always one that you can walk away happy with. You just talk and talk and talk and talk while you're waiting in a goddamn line for 3 whole hours until eventually, hopefully, catharsis. And hey, true story. The part where I was talking about crocodiles skittering up trees. This lady standing in line in front of us with this big-ass Tweety Bird tattoo on her calf turns around and goes, "You know, it's alligators that live in Florida, not crocodiles." Like, as if that's the part where she can't suspend her disbelief. Some people, man.